Welcome to qiphyedu. Today we'll be looking at Economics, IGCSE, Paper 12, February-March 2023. Alright, let's start. Okay, so for the first question, it says in country Z, there has been a decrease in the birth rate. Okay, so in the short run, which variable will be affected? So in a very short period of time, when there's a decrease in birth rates, this means that the amount of humans available on Earth would decrease as well. So that means that if, let's say, we're talking about like a particular country, and the birth rate for that country, like here it says country Z, for example. So when the birth rates decrease, this means that the amount of people that are in that particular country will decrease as well, which means that the population will decrease. So here in the four options, you can see that A says inflation, B says population, C says supply, and D is unemployment. So in this case, this means that if it's in the short run, then the first thing that will be directly affected will be the population. So answer is B. Question 2, the diagram shows the choices for an individual between leisure and earnings. Okay, so you can see on the PPC, there are 2 points. One is point X, which is earnings of $60 and then 12 hours of leisure per day. Whereas for point Y, the earnings would be $80 and then there'll be 8 hours of leisure per day. Now the person decides to take a job that gives more leisure time, so that means that it's basically moving from position Y to position X, or just choosing between these two. Then the person decides to choose position X, which is $60 and 12 hours of leisure per day. So what is the opportunity cost to the individual of moving from position Y to position X? So the opportunity cost will be the next best alternative foregone. So if let's say you were to go with position Y, you end up earning $80. But then if you go with position X, you end up only getting $60. So the opportunity cost of moving to position X, the next best alternative foregone would basically be your $20, right? Because you end up only getting $60 instead of $80. So the opportunity cost would be that $20. So answer is A. Question 3, a student defined opportunity cost as the alternative given up when a course of action is followed. And why is this definition inadequate? So like I mentioned in question 2 just now, the opportunity cost is actually the next best alternative foregone. So here you can see that the next best word, this particular phrase, is now omitted. So let's look at the 4 options and see which one is closest to that. A, it says the next best alternative is not stressed. All right. B, it says the type of economic system is not identified. C says there's no mention of money values. And D, there's no reference to finite resources and unlimited ones. So since opportunity cost basically is defined as the next best alternative foregone, that means that for D, it says there's no reference to finite resources. This one is not correct. This one would be for, if you were talking about the definition of economics in general, that would be social science related to the study of scarce resources. So basically, nope, it's not about economics in general, it's about opportunity cost. So D is not correct. C says there's no mention of money values, which is also not correct. B says the type of economic system is not identified, which is not correct because that's not what you do with the definition of opportunity cost. So the best answer would be A, as it says that the next best alternative is not stressed, which indeed is not stressed because it says the alternative given when the course of action is followed. So A is the answer. Question 4, the market for a good was in equilibrium. A change occurred which resulted in a new equilibrium with a higher price for good and a lower quantity traded, and which change will cause this. Okay, so we're going to draw a DS graph, a demand supply graph. So this will be a supply curve, your demand curve, and this will be a quantity, this will be a price. A new equilibrium with a higher price and a lower quantity traded. So the only possible way for a higher price and also lower quantity would be a shift of the supply curve to the left, which is something like this. So instead of, let's say, X amount, now it becomes Y amount. Instead of, let's say, probably P1, the price is now P2. So indeed, there's an increase in price and a decrease in quantity. So this means that the supply curve shifted to the left. So that means the answer would be, which would be C. So supply curve moved to the left. Question 4, what will result in a movement along the demand curve for a product? So now it's a movement along, all right? So a movement along the demand curve, which will look something like this. So this will be your demand supply graph again. So this will be a supply, this will be demand. A movement along the demand curve could be either a shift of the supply curve to the left or a supply shift, curve of the supply curve to the right. A shift of the supply curve to the right. So it looks something like this. So that means that whatever movement along the demand curve would be, the reason for that would have to be a supply factor. So A says a change in taste. This would be a demand factor. So A is not correct. An increase in demand will also be a demand factor. C, a rise in the price of product, which will result in a shift of the supply curve to the left because of a higher COP. cost of production. So yep. And D says a successful advertising campaign. If let's say there's a successful advertising campaign, this will result in a shift of the demand curve to the right. So this is not correct. So I say C. Question 6, in a year when there were big increases in demand for new cars, many used cars also came onto the market. And the diagrams show the demand for and the supply of new and used cars. The original equilibrium position was at E in each case. What will be the new equilibrium position in each market? So in a year when there were big increases in demand for new cars, many used cars also came onto the market. So this means that, okay, so there's an increase in demand for new cars, so the demand curve will shift to right, which means that the equilibrium position for new cars will be Y. So A, B would be incorrect. And then for and then there's also many used cars that came onto the market, which means that people have decided to, let's say, sell off their used cars, for example, which resulted in many used cars being available for sale. So the supply curve will then shift to right for used cars. So this means that the position would be at Y. So answer is D. As you can see here, for new cars, there will be an increase in demand, like because it really clearly stated there's a big increase in demand for new cars. And then many used cars also came onto the market, which means there's an increase in supply. People might be trying to trying to sell off their used cars, so the supply curve will then shift to right from point A to point Y, so that will be D. Question 7. A government places an indirect tax on a good which has price elastic demand, and what is the result? So again, with our demand supply graph here, this will be a supply curve, this will be a demand curve. We place an indirect tax will result in a supply curve to shift to left. Alright. And then this means that, first of all, the total expenditure of the good will decrease. Unless it's a price inelastic demand, only then the total expenditure will increase, because the percentage change in price, would actually be relatively higher than the percentage change in quantity demanded if it's inelastic. But if it's elastic demand, the quantity demanded, the percentage change in quantity demand will be higher than your percentage change in price, so it has to decrease. And the quantity demanded of the good would then have to decrease as well, which is the same for both elastic and inelastic demand. When there's an increase in price, there will be a decrease in demand. Just that the percentage change will be different, because if it's inelastic, then the percentage change will be lower compared to an elastic demand where the percentage change will be much higher. So both will decrease. So answer is A. Question 8. The price elasticity of demand for cigarettes is estimated to be 0.5. The government introduces a tax on cigarettes to reduce consumption. By how much must the price of cigarettes rise to reduce consumption by 10%? So the PED is 0.5, which means it's inelastic. Okay. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the quantity for PED will be percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. So this would be 0.5. And then if you want to reduce consumption by 10%, this means that percentage change in QD must be negative 10, which will look something like this. Okay, so now I'm going to have to move the percentage change in price to the right and 0.5 to the bottom, which will give us negative, which will give us, basically it'll give us, will basically give us negative 20%, but do bear in mind that 0.5 itself must be negative, because first of all, PED slopes, the demand curve slopes downwards, so your elasticity will always be a negative number. So here I need to add negative to 0.5. Okay, so it's negative 20 divided by negative 10 divided by negative 0.5, so we get something like this. So negative 10 divided by negative 0.5 equals percentage change in price. This will give us 20%. So answer is D. Question 9, the diagram shows the demand for and the supply of bread. The maximum price P1 is fixed by the government, and what is likely to be the immediate result. So there will be an increase in demand but a decrease in supply. But even then, there's an increase in demand. There's no way that the supply can cater for the demand, so there will be a shortage. So A, it says a movement of demand curve to the right. Movement of supply curve to the right. Movement of supply curve to the right and the movement of demand curve to the right both would be incorrect. Even though technically there is a movement of the there's a movement along the demand curve, but here it says a movement of demand curve, which basically means there's a shift. Okay, so that is not correct. And then because of this, you can see that the difference between the supply and the demand basically means that there's less supply to cater for the demand. That means that there is a shortage. So answer is C. Unless it's stated that there is a minimum price above equilibrium, then only then there'll be a surplus. But here it's maximum price below equilibrium, so there is a shortage. Number 10, what is a function of commercial banks? So the commercial bank's function would be to basically for a person to save money and then to save money basically. So you can see that for B, C, and D, B, C, and D are basically the functions of a central bank. Okay, your central bank would be lending money of last resort to government, managing national debt, and also operate monetary policy. Monetary policy is basically handled by the central bank, right? But then if it's deposit and savings, this will be done by the commercial bank. It's basically where folks like us would be saving money, all right? So answer is A. Question 11, the table shows spending in the leisure sector of a country in 1995, 1999, and 2005, and what can be concluded from the table. So you can see that in 1995, leisure spending is 118 billion, but then in 2005, the leisure spending is 198, so it's increasing. 1995, the percentage change of total consumption is 27%, and then in 1999, it's to 27.5%, and then in 2005, it's 28%. So A, it says leisure spending in billions of dollars increased more between 1995 and 1999 than between 1999 and 2005. So, okay. So in this case, 154 minus 180 will get 36 billion. That's a difference. All right. And then from 154 to 198, that will be 48. So the statement leisure spending in billions of dollars increased more between 1995 and 1999 than between 1999 and 2005 is not correct. Okay, and then B says leisure spending is growing in line with income growth. Technically, we can't exactly conclude that, so B is not correct. We can't exactly see an income growth. We can only see leisure spending and percentage of total consumption. C says leisure spending increased by an average of 10 billion a year between 1995 and 2005. So if let's say we were to calculate, so 1999 to 2005, that would be a difference of about 6 years. So if you divide, that will be about 8 billion, an average of 8 billion. So C is also not correct. D says leisure spending is taking an increasing share of total consumption, which is correct because as you can see, in 1995 it's 27%, in 1999 it's 27.5%, and in 2005 it's 28%. So indeed, leisure spending is taking an increasing share of total consumption because the total consumption, the percentage of total consumption has increased. So answer is D. Question 12, the graph shows the supply of labor in 4 occupations, and which graph shows that people prefer leisure to work above a certain income. All right, so you can see that for graph A, when there's an increase in supply, this is also possible. When there's an increase in the quantity of labor, there'll be an increase in the wage rate. So this is not the answer. B, the wage rate remains the same regardless of the quantity of labor. The wage rate remains is different, but then the quantity of labor will then be the same. This doesn't exactly mention that people prefer leisure to work above a certain income because it is just one straight line, so there's no decrease in quantity of labor, so it's not correct. C, you can see that despite an increase in quantity of labor, the wage rate remains the same. So this is not the answer because there's no decrease in quantity of labor. But if you look at D, when there's an increase in quantity of labor, the wage rate will also increase at a certain point, somewhere around here. But then there will be a decrease in supply and then an increase in wage rate, which means that even though there's an increase in wage rate, people would rather just don't work and then the supply will decrease after reaching that particular threshold. So this one will then fit the most when it comes to people preferring leisure to work above a certain income. So answer is D. Because for all the others, even though you can see that for B and C, B, for example, there's no increase in quantity, but then at the same time, there's no decrease in quantity of labor. The quantity of labor remains the same. That means that people still work, but then the quantity of labor supply will not increase. C, there's an increase. There's the quantity of supply, even though there's an increase or decrease, the wage rate remains the same. So there's no way to. So basically, there's no prefer leisure to work above certain income. The income is the same, so that's why it's not correct. But D, though, when there's an increase in income above certain income, there's a decrease in quantity. That's why for this one, people prefer leisure to work above a certain income. So answer is D. Question 13, what would be likely to happen with that country if its government granted more work permits to doctors coming from other countries? So, if let's say the government decides to grant more work permits to doctors coming from other countries, this means that there will be an increase of supply for doctors, because this means that, let's say for example, let's take Malaysia for example, let's say we only have probably 50,000 doctors for example. So now when there's more work permits, maybe we can increase the supply by 30,000, and then we have a total of 80,000 doctors. So yes, there'll be increased supply of doctors. ABC though, it says that there's an increased demand for doctors, which is not correct. An increase in supply does not exactly mean that there will be an increase in demand, because let's say you have 500 sick people, and then they'll be assigned to 500 doctors. But then even though you granted maybe work permits for an extra 30,000 doctors, that doesn't exactly mean that there will be 600 sick people. So yep, there won't exactly be an increase in demand for doctors. That will not be the most likely answer. B, an increased productivity of doctors. This one it's not exactly correct, because even though you grant more work permits to doctors coming from other countries, doesn't exactly guarantee that there'll be an increase in productivity of doctors. Right, that's not the direct. That will not be the most direct answer. Even though it is possible, it's not really a direct answer. And C, it says increased salaries for doctors, which is not correct, because when there's an increase in supply, there'll be a decrease in the price level. So when there's a decrease in the price level, this means that your salaries will also have to decrease. So increasing salary is not it's not really likely to happen unless it's unless there's a very low supply, but then there's a very high supply of doctors after this. So nope. D, it says increased supply, which is the most direct answer. So answer is D. Question 14, what is not a benefit of trade union membership for worker? Alright, so for question 14, it says, okay, for A, it says achieving higher wages for workers, which is a benefit, so it's not correct. B, it says negotiating a higher rate of interest on a bank loan for workers, which is not correct. Now, a trade union membership should be helping the workers to have a lower rate of interest. If you were to have a higher rate of interest for bank loan, this means that the worker would have to pay a higher rate, would have to pay more interest. Let's say if they were to borrow let's say $50,000 for example, then they have a return, maybe a loan, an interest of probably about 7%, but then you want to try to decrease it to 4% instead of having to maintain it at 7%. So if you were to negotiate a higher rate of interest, you're benefiting the bank more than the worker themselves. So B is not correct. C says providing support to workers when being made unemployed. This is indeed a benefit. D says an improvement in the health and safety standards, which is also a benefit. So answer is B. Question 15, what will happen to a firm that expands to take advantage of economies of scale? Economies of scale, alright, so A, it says average cost of production would decrease, which is correct. B, it says average cost of production would increase, which is not correct. A firm tries to expand to take advantage of EOS. So if they were to take advantage of EOS, this means that they will want to have a decrease in the COP. So if you have an increase in COP, then it's basically not going to make any sense. C says profits will decrease, which is not correct. Your expansion is to maximize profits. And D says the price of firm's product will increase, which is not correct. So the best answer would be A. Average COP would decrease. Question 16, the table shows total fixed and total variable costs at different levels of output for a firm, and what happens as output rises. So you can see that the fixed cost is $1,000 regardless of output, but then the total variable cost increases when there's an increase in output. So A, you can see that it says average fixed cost falls, which is correct. B, it says average fixed cost rises, which is not correct. And it says average variable cost remains constant, but if you look at the table, definitely it's not remaining constant. And then D, it says average variable cost rises, which is not correct. So answer is A, average fixed cost falls. Question 17, which characteristics are found in a monopoly? Okay, a monopoly basically meaning there's only one single seller. A, it says freedom of entry to the market and a single seller, which is not correct. If let's say it's a monopoly, that means that there's almost no freedom of entry. That means there's only one manufacturer. B, it says freedom of entry to the market and many sellers. Nope. C, it says many buyers and a single seller, which is correct, because that's exactly what a monopoly is. And D, it says many buyers and many sellers, which is nope. So answer is C. Question 18, what is deflation? Deflation is basically a decrease in the general price level. So A says a decrease in the claimant count, which is not correct. And B says a decrease in CPI, which is correct. And C says a decrease in Human Development Index, which is not correct. D says a decrease in the real gross domestic product, which is not correct. A decrease in the GDP is not deflation, but an increase or decrease in the price level would affect the rate of inflation. So it's not based on the GDP itself, but instead based on the price index. Sorry, it's not price level, but price index. So answer is B. Question 19, what is the likely outcome of an expansionary monetary policy? Okay, expansionary monetary policy basically meaning that there would be an increase in the money supply and also a decrease in interest rates and exchange rates. So A, it says borrowing by consumer falls, which is not correct because now the interest rates are now lower, so people will now rather borrow. B, it says firms expand to meet higher consumer demand, which is correct because indeed there's an increase in aggregate demand. And C, it says prices fall as total supply exceeds total demand, which is not correct because your AD increases, which means that your price level will increase, so your price will not fall, instead it will increase. D says wages rise due to a lower rate of inflation, which is not correct because your aggregate demand increases, your wages will not rise. And in fact, there is no lower rate of inflation. In fact, there would be inflation. So answer is B. Question 20, in the past, governments have adopted policies to try to end a recession in the country and increase economic growth. And which combination of policies is most likely to achieve this? Okay, so A, it says lower taxes and decrease government spending. If you were to decrease your government spending, your AD curve will shift to the left, which means that, your AD curve will shift to the left, which will result in an even worse recession. So A is not correct. B, it says lower taxes and increase government spending, which would help to increase AD. So yep, it will move the economy out of recession. C says raise taxes and decrease government spending, which would result in an AD curve to shift to the left at an even worse rate. And D says raise taxes and increase government spending. If you raise your tax and then increase government spending at the same time, it will not help the most. So answer is B, lower taxes and increase government spending, which would result in the AD curve to shift to the right. Okay, so for question 21, the table shows taxes as a percentage of GDP for 4 countries. And from this information, which country had the highest percentage of direct taxation as a percentage of GDP? Okay, so you can see that there are four taxes here. One is income tax, one is tax on business profits, another is tax on dividends, and also tax on goods and services. So income tax is considered a direct tax. Tax on a business profit would also be a direct tax. And then tax on goods and services would be indirect tax. And then tax on dividends would be considered as direct tax as well. So you see that if we were to calculate A, that would be 12 plus 14 plus 2, which means that it is 28%. And then for B, this would be 14 plus 15 plus 2, so that would be 31%. C would be 17 plus 13 plus 5, which would give us 35%. And then for D, that would be 29%. So the country that has the highest percentage of direct taxation would be C. Alright, so answer is C. And then for question 22, as a country develops economically, what is most likely to happen? So economically, so A, there will be an increase in productivity, which is correct. B says there will be an increase in the birth rate, which is not really likely to happen. In fact, in countries that actually develop economically, the birth rate will actually decrease, and then the average age will actually increase. Then because there's more elderly people. C, there will be an increase in the death rate, which is not exactly correct. D, there will be a reduced occupational mobility, which is not correct. There should be an increase in occupational mobility, so answer is A. Question 23, which government policy will be most likely to reduce structural unemployment? Okay, if you want to reduce structural unemployment, this is basically unemployment that happens because of changes in technological processes. So A, when there's a decrease in real interest, this will only be helpful to the economy. If let's say the unemployment is basically cyclical unemployment, which is unemployment because of economic recession. B, a decrease in tax of goods and services, again the same thing, cyclical unemployment. C, an increase in spending on education and training, which is correct. And D says an increase in tariffs on imported goods and services, which is not correct. An increase in tariffs on imported goods and services would result in an AD curve to shift to the right, but then it's also because of cyclical unemployment, because because of recession-related matters. So answer is C, which should help labor forces people in general to have more training and skills on new technology. Question 24, endowment has a target of keeping inflation between 2% and 3%. The diagram shows the rate of inflation over a 4-year period. And what can be deduced from the diagram? See, in the first year, the rate of inflation is 5%. Second year, it's at 2.5%. 3 is at 4%. And then in year 4, it's negative 1%. So A says the government target was missed in 2 years, which is not correct. They actually missed it in 3 years. So A is not correct. B says the price level fell in 2 years, which is not correct. The price level only fell in 1 year. C says the price level was at its highest in the first year, which is not correct. It's actually at the highest at its third year because the rate of inflation, policy rate of inflation, the last year with the highest policy rate of inflation is year 3. So the price level was at its highest in the third year. And D says the real value of money fell in 3 years, which is correct because in 3 years the rate of inflation is at 5%, 2.5%, and 4%, which means that the price level is increasing at an increasing rate. So I'll say D. 25, a town has a population of 20,000. The birth rate is at 25 per thousand and the death rate is 15 per thousand. The number of people moving in and out of town exactly balances. And what will be the population at the end of 1 year? Okay, so in this case, 25 per thousand and the death rate is 15 per thousand. All right, so for this question, right, so 25 per thousand and then death rate is 15 per thousand. So this means that if I were to round it off to 20,000, that means I need to multiply by 20, and this will give us 500. And then 15, if you want to round it off to something per 20,000, we need to multiply by 20 as well. So this one will give us 300. 500 minus 300, we get 200. So we add that up to 20,000, we'll get C, which will be 20,200. So answer is C. Question 26, what is most likely to be found in a high income economy? Okay, low and high. We'll have for A, it says low access to safe water and high infant mortality rate, which is not correct. If you have low access to safe water, your income would basically be low income economy because first of all, you don't even have proper infrastructure to deal with people's health. And then the fact that you have high infant mortality rate adds up to the equation as well. And it makes matters worse. And B, it says low birth rate and high adult literacy rate. Low birth rate and high adult literacy rate. To say that's actually possible, let's look at C and D. C, it says low GDP per head, but then there's a high access to safe water. If I say there's low GDP per head, that means your income is low, so C is not correct. Even though you have high access to safe water, it doesn't exactly mean that you have a high income economy. You're in a high income economy. And D says low infant mortality rate, but there's a high death rate, which basically, even though technically you can give birth to babies, at the same time many people die, so the economy will also suffer. So answer is B. Low birth rate, but then there's high adult literacy rate, because only with a higher literacy rate you have more skills. When you have more skills, you'll be able to increase the efficiency, increase the supply of goods, and then you'll be able to earn more money out of increasing, by having like supply side policies and so on and so forth, increasing infrastructure and all that. So answer is B. 27, the table shows figures for the real GDP of a country in a particular year. So you can see that in quarter 1 is 100, quarter 2 is 101, quarter 3 is 99, quarter 4 is 98. And then at the end of which quarter had the economy experienced a recession? All right, so in quarter 1 is 100 billion, quarter 2 is 101, quarter 3 is 99 billion, and quarter 4 is 98 billion, like I mentioned. So you can see that for quarter 1 to quarter 2 there is a growth. Quarter 2 to quarter 3 there is a slight decrease in the real GDP, and then from quarter 3 to quarter 4 there is also another slight decrease in the GDP as well. But in this case, the quarter that the economy has experienced a recession would be, we were talking about the worst one, So the worst one will be 98 billion, which is quarter four. So answer is D. 28, what is a quota in international trade? So quota will basically mean like a specific amount, a limit of amount. So A, it says a government grant to encourage production. This will be your export subsidy, something related to export subsidy, so it's not correct. B, it says a limit on the quantity of imports, which is correct. C, it says a tax on imports. This one would be under tariff. And D, it says an administrative and technical barrier, which is not correct. So answer is B. D would fall under non-tariff barriers. So yep, it's not correct because of that. 29, what is an advantage of a floating exchange rate for an economy? A, it says it can correct a current account deficit or surplus, which is correct. B, it says it creates certainty for firms importing goods, which is not correct. C, it says it increases government control of the economy, which is not correct either, because if you want to increase government control, you have to go with either fixed exchange rate or managed float exchange rate. And D, it says stop money flow in and out of the country, which is not correct as well. If you have floating exchange rate, you actually would encourage money to flow in and out, because if you have a high interest rate, a higher exchange rate, people will end up saving money in your country instead. So D is not correct because of that. And yep, so a floating exchange rate would help to correct a current account deficit or surplus. So answer is A. We can't exactly do that with a fixed exchange rate that well, because your exchange rate remains the same. So let's say if you were to have like an increase in demand for your exports, because of the fact that you have the same interest rate, the same exchange rate, it cannot really exactly correct your current account deficit or surplus. Question 30, the table shows information from a country's current account of its balance payments and what is the country's current account balance. So this one would be, okay, let's take a look at the export and goods and imports of goods. So that'll be under NX, net exports. So net exports would be -4 because your imports is 24 billion and your exports is 20 billion. So you're importing more than your exports, so -4. Net services is +5, so we get +1. Your primary income, your secondary income will be -16. So you get -15 billion total for answers. Alright, that's the end of this paper. This is my first take on economics IGCSE, and I hope you like this video. And also at the same time, I hope you found this video helpful. If you think this video would help out other people, do share it out to other people as well. I hope to see you again in the next video, and do comment down below if you think I should make more videos like this. Till then, qiphyedu.